Everyone, today we're going to talk about escalating density training, also known as EDT, and hypertrophy. Our hypertrophy discussion will be sort of a bare bones physiology review. I'm not going to get too deep on it, but just touch on some subject matter there. And with our escalating density training, a lot of it we're going to be basing off of a book written by Charles Staley. And don't let the cover fool you, okay? Don't judge a book by its cover. This looks like it's going to be kind of a rough read, or a total lack of actual science and just complete bro science. And there's a little bit of bro science in there, but you get some good science in there as well. Some great principles and concepts, and just some great information for us to discuss. So that's what a lot of the information is based off of today. And it's going to spawn some great concepts for us to dive into. For programming, consider the progressive overload is really the ultimate goal. If we're pursuing change in body composition or performance or really anything, progressive overload is basically the foundation for everything that's going to occur in a structured training program. EDT workouts employ what is known as the critical density index. Very simply, as soon as you can improve your performance by 20% or better on any given workout, you increase the weight load in the very next workout by 5% and start the process of setting new PRs every workout with this new weight. So that will make a little bit more sense as we dive into exactly how we execute an EDT training session. So here's a program provided within the book. And the book is arms is kind of the name of the game. So I think Charles Staley, he knew what he was doing. He wanted to draw some readers in with, big arms. Lots of people want those big arms. So makes it easier to sell your book, I guess. But there's still some great concepts in here. Let's dive into it. So PR zone, so let's start there. In that first PR zone of a given workout on a given day, there's flexibility. You could go for 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes. But within the book, these two PR zones are options. And what you do is you just give yourself only 2 movements for those 15 minutes. You've got opposing movements, antagonistic, okay? We're doing opposite muscle groups. So the close grip chins, where are they going to work? Our biceps, our upper back, and then the dips, where are they going to work? Triceps, chest, shoulders, okay? So while one movement challenges this array of muscles, the other movement is going to challenge all of the antagonistic muscles, sort of the opposite muscles. And that's going to help the movements, the muscles that are involved in A1 are actually going to be better relaxed, and they're going to theoretically recover a little bit better because they're going to be inhibited during the A2 movement. And how do we know how much reps to do, how much weight intensity to do? Well, as the book instructs us, we want to do 5 reps at what we would estimate to be a 10 rep max. And each rep is going to have a 4-second eccentric. You know what? I could have put a rest column in here. So rest, and about 30 seconds is a good starting point. But if you want to improve, your first go, the first time you go out and attempt this program, you may need more rest. And as you get in better conditioning, your rest might shrink a little bit, and that will allow you to get higher volume and higher density. And what you do is after this PR zone or training zone for 15 minutes, rest and recover, get a breather in, maybe a little bit of nutrition. So the book actually advises getting some carbs and some protein in, and just relaxing for a little bit before going in and doing that next PR zone. Going into that next PR zone, this time it's just gonna be for 10 minutes, okay? So a little bit less time. Again, there's options here. If you wanted to do another full 15 minutes, that's up to you. There's a little bit of give and take there. You just got to understand that you're going to be a little fried going into it, and you may not get the higher intensity out of that full 15 minutes. So again, still just 2 movements. And now we're isolating the movements even more. So standing reverse curl, biceps and bicep brachii, really intensive there. What are we going to do? 5 reps at your estimated 10 rep max. Same thing over here. And then here is your tricep movement. Decline, X bar, tricep extension, okay? And again, just simple, straightforward. How simple is that? It makes so much, it sounds good on paper, right? Is it too simple? Does it need a little bit more sex appeal with maybe some percentages or some strict rest times? You know, the program, if you recall the cover of the book, the program is for growing upper body muscles. This is not focused on making an Olympics or a varsity team or scoring touchdowns. This is for simply growing some muscle mass. But we can take those concepts that are utilized in maybe kind of a beach body approach, and we can take those concepts and we can mutate them for our own purposes as we grow. And maybe we're training general population athletes who maybe just want to be healthier, or if we're training athletes who are playing competitive sports, we can take these principles and we can adjust and adopt them as we please. So another variation that you could do, this one is of my own creation. You could follow that same PR zone time approach. Again, living off of 2 movements. Now these would be tough because the squat and the RDL, they're not exactly opposite movements. There's a lot of carryover. You're using your core, your spine stabilizers on both exercises. Your hamstrings are going to be involved in both exercises. So that RDL, maybe instead of RDL, you could do a hamstring curl. That might give your core and your lower back a little bit of rest and recuperation. Something along those lines might be a wise adjustment. But what could we do here? Well, now that we're sort of shifting into our complex and compound movements that we might have more accurate estimated maxes on, it'd be my idea or my thought process that we could, instead of just writing a 10 rep max, we could actually bring in a percentage of what our estimated 10 rep max would be. And then we would attempt to pursue the same approach using slow eccentrics, taking short breaks. But again, the squat and the RDL, is that a terrible idea because they're both so demanding and they're so big compound movements? Maybe it is. Maybe, I realized that when I was writing it up and typing it up, but I wanted to bring that up as a possible idea, and get you guys thinking about how to program what's going to work smoothly, what's going to keep our athletes safe, what's going to work well. So maybe the RDL is not going to work well. Maybe we need to switch that to a hamstring curl. Maybe we want to switch it to, you could do an upper body press, and you're losing that antagonistic aspect where the muscles are shutting down during the other movement, but then you're shifting blood around the body. and you're not exhausting the core quite as terribly. So there's an idea as well, is maybe we do squat and seated dumbbell overhead press, something like that, where we're just using very different muscles. And again, PR zone 2 for 10 minutes. And again, that 10 minutes could be really anywhere from 8 to 20 minutes would be reasonable or logical based on what we're discussing today. Sticking with 2 movements. This is going to be a little bit more friendly to your lower back and to your core. Now we're using antagonistic muscles again. We're going with the upper body, so that upper body training is going to be less metabolically challenging, less stressful on your CNS. And sticking with 5 reps at 72.5% for your bench press, because that's a percentage that can be associated with your 10 rep max. And then for your pull-up, well, pull-ups kind of get tricky because some people can't do them. Some people can't do it well. Some people can do them really, really well. So, and some of those people weigh the same amount of body weight. So it can get a little tricky to start programming weights for the pull-up. So an idea would be to do the pull-up or lat pull down. And instead of trying to assign a strict percentage, which can be very nice, just revert back to that 10 RM. If somebody can do 10 pull-ups, if they can barely do 10 pull-ups, then they're doing sets of 5 with their body weight. And that's an easy fix. If a person can't do any pull-ups, try to find a lat pull down machine or rig up an assisted pull-up variation that allows them to do 10 reps at a very difficult effort. And again, tempos are slow and eccentric with the concepts that we're borrowing from Charles Staley. What we're doing is we're trying to grow muscle mass. That's our priority with this approach to training. And with what we've done here, where we've got squats and RDLs, bench press, pull up, it's sort of more of a holistic approach. So instead of an arm day or just trying to be a beach body, now we're really training more of an athlete from head to toe. So we're getting a little bit more out of it. And then if you wanted to do some more work, and again, if we're training athletes, I imagine you'd have more of a warm up before you got in that first PR zone, where you're doing mobility, activation, potentiation. You're activating and stabilizing the core so that the core is nice and safe for all of our squat work. And then at the end, if you needed to do some drills or some sport-specific movements, or if you wanted to do just a little bit more weight room work, what I would advise would be just putting in another block, but don't make it another PR zone block. You know, that circuit training back and forth, that supersetting on a time, it's mentally stressful, it's physically stressful. After 2 different segments of it, I would estimate that your lifter is probably a little bit cooked. So any movements that you want to save for the end, I would make them less traumatic, and I would give them preordained repetitions. So I would not go for a 3rd PR zone on a given day with most lifters. And again, just some concepts pulled out from the book, and not invented by Charles Staley, but included in the text, and very pertinent items that are important enough for us to discuss. So the principle of progressive overload. In order to provoke an adaptational response, the organism must be subjected to stressors of ever-increasing magnitude. And I'll usually use 2 examples to basically describe progressive overload to the layperson. One is I'll talk about being a parent. So I have 2 young children, and when I spend time with them, it's exhausting. They are little balls of energy. They're constantly making messes and trying to, fall off of things and break things. And while it's a lot of fun keeping them safe and cleaning up after them, it's tiring. But what you don't see a lot of daycare workers or stay-at-home parents end up in just amazing shape. Okay, the reason for that is that as my kids run around and make messes and keep me busy and keep me on my toes, they're not necessarily taking a organized structure to running faster and making bigger messes over and over again. So what they're doing is making me tired, but it's not magically transforming me to be in better shape. And the other example of that I would put would be construction work. If I was to go work a day of construction right now, I'm sure I would be exhausted at the end of the day. And I would feel that way for several days afterward, probably a few weeks. But again, construction workers, people don't go do construction work and then end up on bodybuilding stages or magazine covers. There's a difference between doing exhausting work and achieving higher levels of performance that cause our bodies to change. And what we want progressive overload. We want to find a stimulus that will drive a new adaptation. And there's 3 ways to accomplish this. Increase your intensity. Intensity is defined as the absolute difficulty. So think about the weight on a bar. So getting an individual to lift heavier weights would be a way of increasing the intensity, or the quality of your training. So think about an individual lifting a weight, let's say a 200-pound squat, but they're squatting faster. They're standing up faster than they used to. We know because of compensatory acceleration training, we know that this has a lot of benefits. Increased volume. This refers to the total amount or the quantity of your training. So let's say a person is squatting 100 pounds and they're squatting it 8 times. Well, if we can get them to squat it 9 or 10 times, we have increased their volume, provided a new stimulus, and hopefully that's going to provide a new adaptation. And another way we can provide progressive overload is increase the density. So escalating density is both a name and a hallmark of the EDT system. So doing a certain amount of work in a given time, and then doing more work in the same time limit. That's EDT in a nutshell. Some more principles that are included and that I think we should discuss. Progressive overload, we already checked that box. Principle of reversibility. So when we take time off of training, we are granted a little bit of a leeway before we start losing strength and muscle mass, muscular endurance, speed. All of these have different rates of decay. But if we find ways to train more frequently, more often, more consistently, this allows us to avoid that principle of reversibility. And the nice thing about the EDT system is if you go into train on a day, if you're not feeling well, if you don't have the gas in the tank, if you just can't perform, then you're not going to have a very dense training session. If you can't perform, then you'll just back off. You're not going to load weight onto a bar that you can't take out and use and feel good doing it. So if you stall or if you're not succeeding, we know that it's time to change something up. And that's where it comes in, the principle of variability. Over time, monotonous stimuli tend to result in ever smaller disruptions to homeostasis as the organism learns to cope with already familiar stressors. That's why if I went and worked construction for a few weeks, my endurance would probably go up. I'd be burning calories. I may get a little bit leaner, but I would get used to it. When I chase my kids around at home, they're not systematically making bigger messes and running faster and all those things. So while it's fatiguing, it's not stimulating in a new way that will cause disruption to my homeostasis. With EDT, think about that staircase that we saw a little bit earlier. Let's actually go back to it real quick. Here we go. With EDT, jump back into this, is that the critical density index tells us that when performance goes up by 20% or better, then the next time we visit that workout, we're going to increase our weights by 5%. And so this allows us to create a system to progress. Principle of variability. So we're progressing. And also what you would do, as advised by Charles Staley, based on his system and his advice, is you're going to rotate movements every 4 weeks or so. Half the movements in your program get rotated out and exchanged. And that's not a bad rule of thumb. I think many other programs would maybe not exactly agree with that protocol, but close to it, and that they would agree with it. It's a great idea. Principle of specificity. The body's adaptation to training is very specific to the type of training stimulus. Thus, the athlete must first decide which type of adaptation is desired, whether it be strength, speed, power, agility, or whatever. Again, if I were going to work construction, it's not necessarily going to make me better in the weight room or better on the soccer field. And also, if I start working at a daycare, it may not make me better at basketball, even though it might challenge me to do fatiguing activities and to change direction a lot and stay low. The carryover to basketball, probably pretty low. Principle of specificity, also think back to the principle of variability, wherein we want to keep certain exercises for long enough for them to behoove us and benefit us, and then to try to change them out to capitalize on the principle of variability. Most scientific research keeps a minimum of 6 weeks of research before publishing. So that 4 to 6 weeks of training is a good idea to start rotating some movements out. And then with a lot of our mesocycles that we do, we train on 3-week cycles. So if your 4th week is a deload week, or if you're just keeping in certain exercises, but putting them in a different intensity zone within your training sessions, then we're keeping the same movement, but we're just utilizing it in a different way. So you have lots of option there. That's where that art and the science collide big time. The principle of individual response. Basically, we're kind of all snowflakes. Some things work out really well for some people and some things don't for others. But overall, most things overlap, and there are tendencies to work with the majority of the population. So I would encourage each of you to adhere to these principles, to at least consider them for both yourself and for the individuals that you program for. And again, thinking about antagonist muscles. So let's take the bicep curl. As you curl the weight, the motor cortex of your brain signals the triceps to relax in order to allow the biceps to contract. This phenomenon is called Sherrington's law of reciprocal inhibition. So again, when we train opposing muscles, because of Sherrington's law of reciprocal inhibition, the theory is that during a bicep curl, your triceps may actually relax a little bit more than if you were just standing around between tricep sets. So it's just another thought or philosophy that Staley provides us as he's promoting this EDT program. On this slide, we're just going to compare what a typical program looks like versus the EDT program. Okay, for our top column, choosing a weight you can perform for 10 rep maximum. All right, so choosing the same weight. And then in a traditional program, you would perform all 10 reps. You would really dig deep. You would get to exhaustion. And then in the EDT program, just 5 reps. Okay, we're going slow. We're doing our 4 seconds per rep. And typically you would then rest 2 minutes between sets. That allows your ATP to recover, your heart rate to drop, get you feeling good, go back in and get some more. And then with our EDT program, more like 30 seconds. Typically, you're going to do 3 total sets. With the EDT program, more like 10 sets. Say 8 minutes over here, 8 minutes over here. Again, EDT, your bottom of your windows are probably going to be around 8 minutes. Top of your windows would be about 20 minutes. And then looking at your volume lifted, you're looking at 3,000 versus 5,000 pounds. So our density of training, as well as our overall volume, is greater. And then how would we know to progress? Again, so once that 5,000 pounds gets to 6,000 pounds, we then go back and we increase our bar weight by 5%. Okay, should we really, how many people should be pursuing hypertrophy? Is it just possibly chemically supported athletes who wear tank tops and do bicep curls? Or do many athletes have the potential to benefit from hypertrophy training? Well, I would be more in the boat of the majority of athletes benefiting from hypertrophy training. And how many athletes need to spend a lot of time doing it, or a bulk portion of their year doing it? Not that many. You know, if you think about professional sports, you know, golfers, female golfers, years ago, Michelle Wie was 13 and 14 years old and she started playing professional golf. If you look at the NBA, males straight out of high school have gone in and been productive and successful in the NBA. You know, obviously not too many, but like a LeBron James and Kobe Bryant, no college experience and just went right in. But then when you get to the NFL, well, why doesn't anybody go from high school into the NFL? Then what, you know, it happens in baseball, in the MLB, it happens in the NBA, but in the NFL, there just is usually not enough time in that window of youth up to about 18 years old to develop the size and strength that is necessary to go out and play the game of football. So sometimes a lot of our athletes just need more size on them, and it's part of their pursuit of strength to go out and play their sport. So, there's some sports that have weight classes, wrestling, some other combat sports. So while they need to get bigger and stronger, a lot of times they cannot spend a lot of time doing hypertrophy work, because then they are too heavy and it messes up their game plan. How about sort of our general population athletes? I would say that when you get maybe a 25-year-old male who comes in and wants to gain some muscle mass versus his sister who's 35 and has a few kids and she wants to lose weight, versus their parents who are 55 and 60 and they want to just be healthier and live long lives. Hypertrophy training is kind of that sweet spot in between so many of those things. So with hypertrophy training, one of the best ways that we can lose fat is to add muscle mass to our bodies. Our muscle mass is going to be utilizing calories at a higher rate than non-lean mass. So adding muscle is a great way to get leaner. And not to mention that most people really struggle to have the combination of the proper hormones, the proper diet to actually grow big muscles. So historically, it was always sort of a stereotype to have females come in and say, I'm scared of getting big and bulky. And as a young man, when I was personal training and dealing with this population day in and day out, as a young man who had all the right hormones going for him naturally and was eating to pursue muscle mass, this was almost laughable, because I knew that my testosterone levels were about 20 times what many of these gals were saying, and that I was eating substantially more than I anticipated the average individual would accidentally eat and accidentally bulk up. Now, times have changed. CrossFit has made being fit and muscular much more common and much more status quo. But anyways, when I was a personal trainer in like the late 2000s, that was just almost like a laughable conversation that I had. I can't tell you how many times is that females were coming in and concerned about growing too much muscle, when in reality, that's what would help them. That's one of the most beneficial ways for them to train to change their metabolism. So nothing against my ladies. Don't want to go down that route too far. Just a little story about conversations that I had, an opinion that I have on what is going to benefit many individuals, male or female, in their pursuit of losing fat and getting leaner. So that's hypertrophy work. How about your older populations? When we get older, we tend to have sarcopenia, so we tend to have muscle loss. That's one of the trademarks of aging. So hypertrophy work is going to help with that. We tend to have a fat increase. So in America, it's almost a linear plot, is that as you age, you tend to fatten up. Again, I've expressed my opinion, and I think quite a few other people would agree with me, is that that hypertrophy work, the increasing of muscle mass, is one of the most beneficial ways to decrease your fat mass. And then obviously our example of the 25-year-old male who wants to come in and get bigger and stronger, hypertrophy is right up his alley as well. So I think many people want hypertrophy. As far as athletes, not all of them need it. Some of them shouldn't do it, such as a fighter or a wrestler who's already sort of at the top of his or her weight class. a lot of our endurance athletes, need to do a little bit of hypertrophy work, but you don't want to do so much that there's now logging around big biceps and giant pecs, up and down mountains and around tracks. So keep your population in mind. All right, let's get a little bit more sciencey with hypertrophy work. What are we looking at? With our hypertrophy work, we're looking at 67 to 85%. So our 10 rep max is going to fall basically right in there, kind of on the lower end, but right in there. Goal repetitions, well, this challenges it is because we're only doing 5 reps at a time. But the approach is that the amount of work done in an 8 to 20 minute window is going to be conducive with challenging the muscle and causing enough damage to cause hypertrophy. So it's a little bit of a different approach. That's admitted. Sets, we're going to do quite a few more sets than that, hopefully doing somewhere between 9 and 12 sets. And then your rest period is going to be right around 30 seconds. Obviously, take more if you need it. You don't want to be climbing under a challenging weight and unprepared to stabilize and have proper form. And it says optimal time under tension is 40 to 60 seconds. Well, with EDT, you would not be hitting that window, because if you're doing 5 reps at a 4-second eccentric, you're really only hitting 20 seconds of time under tension. But again, the idea is that we are breaking the mold a little bit to pursue a different avenue, but end up in the same destination. Again, here's why we have 72.5 as our anticipated workload. And if you were taking athletes on a movement such as maybe the pull-up, where you have a big group of athletes and you don't know exactly how many pull-ups everybody can do with what weights and things like that, a quick way would be to say, what are 10 pull-ups that you can do very, very hard? Some individuals can do that with a significant amount of weight hanging around their hips. Some people can't do it at all, and they might use a lat pull-down machine instead. And what you would do is just have them anticipate that set of 10 very, very hard, and then they only do 5 reps per set, right? So that's going to be a good way to get the party started. Keep things simple and allow you to get started, and then you can adjust. If you bit off more than you could chew, then the next time around you reduce your intensity and you start over again. So think about our staircase, think about that. We're progressing. If we're not perfectly progressing from week 1, that's not the end of it. That's not the end of the world. The idea is that we're getting a significant amount of progression over several weeks. Okay, regarding hypertrophy, in theory, we really have 2 different options. We have sarcoplasmic hypertrophy and myofibrillar hypertrophy. And in our sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, we're really sort of filling in the gaps. Okay, so there's more glycogen and myoglobin, which are fluids, which bring in energy resources, and it makes our muscles bigger from the inside out. Sometimes this is going to be also called tertiary hypertrophy or temporary hypertrophy. So maybe getting a pump on or getting just blood and fluid to accumulate in those muscles for temporary, it might be 5 minutes, 5 hours, typically 72 hours is considered by some to be the top end of your sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Others believe that we're able to create much more substantially long-term hypertrophy due to sarcoplasmic reasons, the storage of fluids, blood, water, energy resources, all those things. So in theory, the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is much more disputed than the myofibrillar. Myofibrillar would be more as a result of the biomechanical changes. So our stressors from our training causing changes that are more measurable and long-term, such as, pardon me, such as adding of proteins, so actin, myosin, titin, as well as sarcomeres. So with that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, if you look at the muscle, within the muscle, the mass, the matter, is mostly the myofibrillar proteins, but within the sarcoplasm, you have more proteins. And then the stroma are a little bit more. I'm sorry, guys. Coughing fit, too much cardio right before I record. It's a bad habit. I'm sorry. The stroma, that's actually connective tissue. So if you look it up, it's one of the reasons that veal, so younger beef, is going to be softer, more delicate than older beef, is because they're developing and accumulating stroma. Now, if you look at the ratios there of 3 to 1 to 1, that 3 to 1 to 1 is pretty consistent regardless of training. So different training protocols don't tend to swing that out of ratio too often. So you can get small adjustments there, but it's nothing worth really highlighting the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, in fact, exists and is the end-all be-all. Although I would argue that it does exist. I'm a believer in it, and even though the research doesn't back it quite as much, based on training protocols that I've seen and practiced, I think down the road more research will validate it even more. And with myofibrillar hypertrophy, we have much more scientific backing. It's easier to measure. It's easier to rationalize, and that the stressors that external forces are causing very much more measurable changes. So proteins are coming in, satellite cells are being sent in to create more myofibers and sarcomeres. So it's just a process of stimulus and adaptation. So stress and recovery. With all of our periodization and all of our rationalization for complex training protocols. Many times what we're really trying to do is to nurture this process. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into creating strength and endurance and speed and power, but many of those things are driven from a greater cross-sectional area of muscle and muscle fibers. So when we're training, oftentimes we're pursuing this process. Is EDT appropriate? Again, for many athletes, it's not something that you'd want to spend a lot of time on. You wouldn't want to necessarily spend several weeks on it for every athlete, much less several months. And something to keep in mind is that our muscles, you can sort of, there's a saying that says, if you chase 2 rabbits, you'll catch none. So when we're working on strength improvements and fatigue improvements, those are sort of 2 separate things. It's better if you know you need strength, if you're a power lifter, or if you're a tennis player who isn't hitting the ball hard enough or fast enough. I don't play tennis, so maybe not my best example, but let's say you've got a young female who just needs some upper body strength. She's never lifted before in her life, and all the veteran athletes are just beating her, not because they're better, but just because she can't hit that ball as hard as she needs to. She might need to go do some strength work. So you just have to identify needs. And when it comes to athletes, not every athlete needs to do, and I say this with endearingly, not everybody needs to do meathead workouts where we're pursuing hypertrophy. So this is one system that's attempting to cause stress in a little bit of a non-traditional way. And many athletes, many individuals may benefit from it. As far as EDT being appropriate, it may not be. But if you want to do maybe some conditioning and you want to do something besides just running around, if you have an athlete who's injured, maybe it's a season-ending injury, ankle, knee, or hip or something for many sports is going to take them out for the rest of the season. And if you're doing EDT with upper body training, it's going to get them huffing and puffing and sweating and make them feel like they are sort of, training for their sport still. And yeah, you'll get them a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, but you also help keep their conditioning up, even though their ankle's in trouble and they can't go run around. So it has a time and place. There is a good way to apply this. Okay, so kind of I hope you all take what we've talked about today as an option, not necessarily a suggestion. I just want to bring it up because it is off the beaten path. It is a little bit different from a lot of the programs that we will see and discuss. And I think that is it for today. Yep. Okay, we'll see you guys.